He begot a son, but before the boy was born he took what we used to call French leave. Hugh went back to Wales and there was the queen whose name was Hers Lloyd. Hughie on the jousting festival and became her husband, and now he's the husband of twa queens. He begets a child on her and then goes back to fight for the Califondies. Killed. The child that was born in the Near East was Fire Fizz because he was black and white. And the child in Wales was Parzival. So, Parzival, the Christian knight, has a Muslim brother whom he does not know. His mother decided she didn't want and talk now anything about knights, no more of this nonsense. So showing up too. The Grail romance is that of the Godine, your own heart, and the Christ becomes a metaphor, a symbol for that transcendent power which is the support and being of your own life. Joseph Campbell, 107. The Hero's Journey. Connecticut or something like that, and brought forth her little boy on a farm. And so he knew nothing about knighthood. Buddha had the spirit and heart, the noble heart of his father. He was a born knight, Thaha didn't know it. Sofan he was about 15 or 16 years old, hies out in the fields and he sees 3 knights come by on horseback. He thinks they're angels, that's all his mother has told him about, so he gets down on his knees. They said, "Get up, you don't pray to us. We're knights, off King Arthur's court." He says, "What's a knight? How does one become a knight and jet or Thor's court?" "Oh, Ides just out the air." He goes back and tells his mother, "I want to be knight." So she faints. Then she decides she's gotta fix him. She makes a fool's costume and he goes trotting off. She trots after him down the road and when he turns the corner she drops dead. That's the way his career begins, by killing his mother. Ides not a good start. Anza, there he goes, riding all day. At night the horse pulls Supot at little rural castle. The knight whose castle it is has lost 3 sons in jousting tourneys. But still Hahash's little daughter there with him, so you can see the situation. In comes Parzival, whom they think is the great and famous Red Knight, and they greet them. Of course, when the time comes to take off armor and give him a bathe all covered with rust. Inside and went there and move there is this fool. But this old boy, his name is Gernmans, recognizes good man flesh and sees a great boy here. So he Takishiman and teaches him the rules of knightly combat, how to maneuver horses, the rules of combat. And one of their releases, a knight doesn't ask unnecessary questions. That earns Suto be bad bite of news later on. Gernmans recognizes that he'd like to have Yamashasan. So in every pretty scene he offers his daughter as a wife to Parzival Sotha that would have another son and the girl would have a HUS band and all that. Parzival thinks, I must not be given a wife. I must earn a wife. And that's the beginning of the new philosophy, you see? He breaks away from the idea of just accepting things that are given to you by society. In a very delicately handled scene, these two part. Hurried away, no watch change night. Helets there Ensley's lack on the horse's neck. Now this is Amahor image in medieval mythology. 108. The meeting with the goddess. In the Grail Castle, Parzival receives his sword from the king. Medieval manuscript. Circa 1330. And other mythologies as well. The horse represents the nature power and the rider represents the controlling mind. Therein slack means that is riding nature. His own nature. It's a noble horse who has the same hard ash. The horse carries Shamal Dend in the evening it comes. To a castle that is in some distress. Ides the castle of Faladil orphan queen. She's just the sage and her name is Condrumers, from Conduir Amur, Guide to Love. When he arrives, of course, his armor's taken off, he's given a nice bath and soft robes and so forth, and presently it comes time to retire, Andy's given a bed. Well, in the middle of the night he wakes up and sees she is kneeling by the bed, weeping. And he says to her just what the nightshade said to him, you don't kneel Tom, only to God. If you want this bed, I'll go over there. Onder is what he said. If you'll promise not to wrestle with me, I'll just get in and tell me. Story. And Wolf Ramses, but she was dressed for her. She was wearing a transparent nightgown. So she gets to bed and she's crying and she tells him her story. My castle is under siege. There's a knight, Clomide, the greatest knight in the world, who wants my property and May is his wife. Now there is the old medieval thing again. Shelso is resisting, do you see, Asher resisted. But, she says, you've seen how high the towers are. My castle. I would rather throw myself from the highest tower. 109. The hero's journey. Into the moat than to marry this man. The knight had sent on army with his great general to conduct the affair. And Parzival says, well, I'll kill him in the morning. And she says, that'll be just fine. So in the morning the drawbridge goes down and brrrrmmm. Down comes the Red Knight, riding, on it collides with the seneschal, the leader of the king's army, and presently the enemy is on his back, and Parzival hashes knee and hish stand. Rips his helmet off, and is about to cut his head off when the man says, I yield. Parzival says, okay, you go to Thor's court, tell them you are my man and I sent you. After a couple of affairs of this kind, King Arthur's court begins to think, say, that was some chap de tway ago. So the latter decide that they're gonna go out and try to find him. Parzival comes back into the castle and Condwura Mersha's put her hair up in the way of married woman. So there's a spiritual marriage, each has chosen Theophor voluntarily, Onda has chosen, AWI Faindeed, and then they go to bed that night. As Wolframses, not Manulata nowadays would be pleased with that night's sleep. Because it didn't even touch her, Heck knew nothing about this things. 2 days and 2 nights more they're happy in this way. And then on the third night he remembered how his mother had told him of embraces, and Gurnemans, too, explained to him that husband and wife are one. Soften, as Wolframses, if you will pardon me, they interlaced arms and legs and felt that this is as it should have been going all the time. Now the idea there is that the physical is the consummation of love and the sacramentalization of the physical is the love. There's no clergy involved here at all. Love is fulfilled here in marriage and marriage is the consummation of love. This just threw the holding into a new perspective. There were 5 virtues of the medieval knight: temperance, courage, loyalty, courtesy, and love. And this young man is endowed with them all. 110. The meeting with the goddess. Favorite. What effect did the story you told have on Europe? At the time it was written? Was it read by many people, or was it just something that you feel had an effect, just through your study of mythology? Campbell. There was a great wave of Arthurian romance, first with the appearance of Geoffrey of Monmouth's History of the Kings of Britain in Latin. This was an account of the legends of the kings of Britain before the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons, starting with Ahriman Brute, after whom Britain is named. King Arthur appears there as a fighter against the Anglo-Saxons when they're coming in. This sprung a whole tide of stories having to do with the Celtic heroes and Celtic themes. Now the importance is not so much that this particular romance influenced people, but that it is symptomatic of a whole trend in thinking at that time. These romances spuried an attempt on the part of Europe to assimilate Christianity. Christianity came from another part of the world. It came from the Near East, a Sanalien religion, and was forced on Europe. It's in the 11th and 12th and early 13th centuries that Europe begins to assimilate it. There was a bishop or an abbot, Joachim of Florence, who around the 1200s published a statement of what they called the 3 ages of the Spirit. The first age of the Spirit is that of Islam and the age of the Father, the preparation of a priestly race, worthy to become the vessel of the Incarnation. The second age of the Spirit was that of the Son in the Church, bringing this message to the world. The third age of the Spirit, which is about to dawn in the 15th century, was to be that of the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, where the Holy Spirit will speak directly to teach and the institution of the Church will gradually disappear. Now, of course, this was heresy and was condemned, but it caught on. The Grail Castle is a castle that participates in this new experience. The Grail Knight, whether his name is Galahad or Parzival, appears in flamingrid armor, appears in Arthur Castle at the time of the Pentecost, the descent of the Holy Spirit. So that the Grail Knight is the equivalent to Christ, that is to say, as the vehicle of the Holy Spirit. This whole drift is what is marked in this book, and it's a drift away from the orthodox Christian pattern. The hero's journey. Campbell. There's an interesting thing about the date of the Tristan story that comes at the end of the 12th century, about 1160 to 1170. It's exactly the same period of the Krishna cult in India, where the god Krishna falls completely, totally, in love with a married woman, Radha. Again, it's the rule-breaking, law-breaking thing that the religious ecstasy represents, going pastrational bounds into the irrational, complete giving of oneself. And here is the god himself who is involved in this. The principal poem celebrating this is called the Gita Govinda, or Song of the Cowherd, and it was composed by a young Brahmin who was in love with the daughter of his guru. He represents himself as Krishna and his beloved as Radha. And that's exactly the same period. A century before, or half-century before, in Japan, you have the Lady Murasaki's Tatalio, Genji, which is a story of love and also the experiencing of the sigh of things, the sensitive sigh of things, which is the all life is sorrowful teaching of the Buddha. Right across the aristocratic world, from Europe to the China Seas, you have this aristocratic love as a spiritual experience. Now in Illimit comes along with the Sufis. In the Arabian Nights there are lots of stories of absolute love. The woman there is usually a 5,000 dinar girl. Overwhelmed, this chap goes nuts. The whole world is full of this at this time. And now the Sufis will tell you, yes, Europe got it from them, but they misunderstood it. But this is not what happened. They received it from them perhaps, but hated and misunderstand it. They read it. In the Orient the woman is symbolic, really, of womanhood. And very often there's a woman of inferior caste. Whereas in Europe it was a lady of equivalent dignity socially, and Charlemagne, that woman, addressed to a specific person, not as a goddess. So there was a very important difference. And there's a difference also between the Provençal troubadour tradition and the German Minnesinger, which means the same thing, singers of love. In France the beloved is usually a lady of high degree. But in Germany there was this wonderful lyric poet, Walter von der 112. The meeting with the goddess. Krishna and Radha, the rapture of love. South India, 18th century. Erotic mysticism was in the air in those days. Vogelweider, the greatest lyric poet of the Middle Ages. His poems are full of just lovely, beautiful girls. He says somewhere the word woman is a nobler word than lady. So this medieval idea of love can be inflected in various ways. But from one end of the earth to another, erotic mysticism was in the air in those days. 113. The full round, the norm of the monomyth requires that the hero shall now begin the labor of bringing the runes of wisdom, the golden fleece, or his sleeping princess, back into the kingdom of humanity, where the boon might ray down to the renewing of the community, the nation, the planet, or the 10,000 worlds. Joseph Campbell, The Hare with a Thousand Faces. Campbell, Lefevre, and Henry Morton Robinson, CO authors of A Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake, 1944. Robinson presented the photo to Campbell with this inscription on the back: Dear Joe, this is your copy, suitable for framing. It shows you to be very handsome, and me, Veribald. Rondo. V less than? Carat, CJ. 77 Zephyun. In 1943, on the suggestion of his friend and mentor, Heinrich Zimmer, the Bollingen Foundation invited Joseph Campbell to edit and write a commentary on its first publication, Madakasasware. The two Comito their father, a Navajo war ceremonial. This, he said, brought them full circle back to Buffalo Bill. The following year he published his first major work, a collaboration with author Henry Morton Robinson, A Skeleton Key to Finnegan's Wake, as well as Sophocles commentary of complete Grimm's fairy tales. Zimmer died of pneumonia in 1943, and Campbell took on the painstaking task of editing Zimmer's American Lectures, a 12-year project that produced 4 volumes of Indian art and mythology. Campbell was also work on the book that would earn the devotion of students and artists and these corn of many academics, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. Published in 1949, it won an award from the National Institute of Arts and Letters for contribution to creative literature, and became the most popular book in the Bollingen series after Richard Wilhelm's translation of the Ching. During the 1950s and 1960s, in addition to teaching at Sarah Lawrence, Campbell edited the Portable Arabian Nights, the Myth and Man series, and 6 volumes of the Iranos papers from the Jung conferences at Bollingen. Served as president of the Creative Film Foundation, and wrote numerous academic articles and book reviews. 115. Less than B. V.P. Brown. Can you describe your early days as a writer? Campbell. I was learning so much and experiencing so much in my reading that although when I had been in prep school I had intended to keep on with writing, I had no ambition to write. I was just reading. When Finnegan's Wake came out in 1939 I had already found it when I had been in Paris. I had been appearing in Miles Jollis's Transition magazine, in an earlier version under the title, Work in Progress. I had become fascinated in the material at that time because it meant something to me. So when the book came out I immediately bought a copy and spent the first weekend reading it through. And, oh, it was a grand experience reading Finnegan's Wake and being more or less ready for it. In my days at Columbia, when I used to be running around, I got to know a young professor named Henry Morton Robinson. WHOUSEDTO come out and kick a football around the field. I had known him for many years, and when I went up to Woodstock in the middle of the Depression, there was my friend Rondo. A Swede called him, without a J.O. band with a family, sweating it out. Finally he broke it through and go to job with Writer's Digest Ghost writing 3 or 4 articles a month. And so he was a real pro in handling writing. So one day this chap comes down from Woodstock for dinner with Jean and me and he and his wife. At dinner he says, how's it going with Finnegan's Wake? And he said, well, it's going just fine. He said, somebody's got to eradicate this thing and it might as well be you and I. I said, oh, come off it. And he said, come in, let's draw ourselves. We made an arrangement that we would write an introduction. I started really digging in and pulling it apart and I wrote, from the first page, about 40,000 words. When I brought it to Robinson he said, for God's sake, what are you going to do? The Encyclopedia Britannica? OD greater than, N less than PQ greater than. Campbell. I want to tell you something, and anyone who is a scholar may enjoy this message. When you're gonna call. 116. The boon. Laborate C with somebody, make a very strict line where your author ITY begins and ends and where your collaborator begins and ends. If you have that line good and clean then you will end up friends. Otherwise it won't happen. We had it. Robinson was a good Joycean student, bootyfit. Comito a discussion as to what Joyce meant and we were in disagreement, I was right. And if it came to a question about how to write a book, he was right. So I bring him a first statement. He said, Joe, this is a funny thing to say but everything is upside down. You say at the end of your paper what should have been said at the beginning and this goes for every paragraph and practically for every sentence. I went home that night and thought about that and I thought, this is why I have been brought you pas a scholar, writing for scholars or wishing to write for scholars. The scholars always tell you what the other fellow wad said about this thing and then they kick him off with one sentence, then they tell you what somebody else said and they kick him off with another sentence, then they tell you all the difficulties that they have had in finding their thing. Then they come out with this little mouse that comes out of the mouth. And so that's one way of writing. My friend Robinson said, listen, when you are writing for civilized people you are the authority. Tell them in the beginning what you are thinking. Then what you will say will be illustrative of that. They will get the idea first, then they will know why you are writing all the rest of it. Well, that was illuminating. But it has deprived me of a good deal of, what can I say, academic prestige. That makes you a popular writer, you see, instead of the other kind. Foe. X less than? Q greater than? Campbell. Well, we worked on the skeleton Kiefer, I guess, about 5 years. And, of course, when we had it done nobody wanted it. We were about to publish the thing ourselves. Somehow or other because we had sent it to Harcourt Brace, which was publishing his works, and they had returned it. 117. The Hero's Journey. Then Horton Wilder's Theskino 40th Komisalong. I went with Jean to see it one Saturday night, front seats balcony. Oh my god, what I was hearing was Finnegan's Wake. One line after another. I was just full of the stuff. And I said to Jean, do you have a pencil? Shahada Womanbag thought that everything in it, so I had a pencil and I could just jot down the quotation sass. They came. I still have the program where I was copying down the quotes from Finnegan's as they came. I phoned my friend Robinson the next morning at Wood Stock, and he said, hey, Rondo, I think we should write a letter to the New York Times. This is just outrageous. My god, the skin of our teeth this Finnegan's Wake. And he said, I'll bed down Monday and we'll talk about it. When he heard what it was phoned down to the Saturday Review to Norman Cousins. And we worked on the paper that day and in the evening brought it down to the Review. Cousins looked at it and says, what's Haldwick Kellett? Let's call it, the skin of whose teeth? So published. This. But it was just as the war had broken out, just after Pearl Harbor, and Wilder was in the army. He was a captain. The next thing you know he was a major and the next thing you know he was something more than that. So the newspaper boys came down on us from all angles just like a bunch of dive bombers. Wawas. This pair of mix? This wasn't the civilization we were fighting for. Let's cool it, I said to Robinson. Wilder's gonna have to publish it in book form and we'll do the job in it then. When the play did come out in book form I went through it with a fine tooth comb. There were at least 400 quotations. Every character was right out of Finnegan's Wake, and THE problems were out of Finnegan's Wake. Andy located a 4-line quote, verb for verb, na forenoon. And so we wrote, the skin of whose teeth, party, and after that, the skin of whose teeth. Party, and that did it. Campbell. When I completed a skeleton key to Finnegan's Wake I gave a copy to Mrs. Eugene Meyer and she sent a copy to 118. The Boon. Thomas Mann. Andy wrote here a letter, and that letter is published in the collected letters of Thomas Marin, of which I have a copy. Of course when I see thing like that I look up my own name in the index and I find that there was a letter about me. This was the letter then Kinger for a skeleton key to Finnegan's Wake. I had me them so I knew to the K knew who it was. So I'm reading this letter to Mrs. Eugene Meyer, Agnes Meyer, about thanking you for sending me Joseph Campbell book. I appreciate it very much because I could not possibly, myself, read Finnegan's Wake. But, reading this book, I am confirmed in my suspicion that I have had for some years, namely, that James Joyce was the greatest novelist of the 20th century. This from Thomas Mann. ID's there in print. That's biggin. Hispart. That's real big. B.D. P9. Brown. What was the genesis of the hero with 1,000 faces? It's my understanding that it was a king from all along, but the actual writing began while you were at Sarah Lawrence. Campbell. Robinson was publishing something of his own with Simon & Schuster at that time and they said, who's this guy, Campbell? And Robinson said, oh, he's the greatest. So they said, would like him to do a book on might. So get a phone call from my friend Robinson, Onda says, Joe, Simon & Schuster's interested in a book on mythology and a future to Punur Highway San Nakundanal. Never talk to you again. We arranged for a publisher's luncheon and they said, yes, would like a book on mythology. What kind of book do you want? We want a sort of modern bullfinch. I said, I wouldn't touch it with it in football. They said, what would you like to do? I said, I'd like to write a book on how to read a myth, a sort of self-help book? Yeah, okay. Write out a presentation and we'll talk about it. So I went home. Jean was on tour at the time, and I spent one night just typing up a presentation, an idea for a book, and Weatherwellison with a low of amusement, to the dream like mumbo-jumbo of some red-eyed witch doctor of the Congo, orade, with cultivated rap, toure thin translations, from the sonnets of the mystic Lao Tse, now and again crack the Hard's Hellofan argument of Aquinas, or catch suddenly the shining meaning of a bizarre Eskimo fairy tale. It will always be Theon, shapeshift, ing yet marvelously constant story that we find, together with a challengingly persist, tense suggestion of more remaining to be experienced than will ever be known or told. Joseph Clampbell, The Hare with 1,000 Faces. N.Y. The Hero's Journey. My own first book, The Hare with 1,000 Faces, wrote right after doing a skeleton key to Finnegan's Wake, was just saturated with Joyce in what calls the monomyth the one myth and the one cycle. I took it from Joyce. I took it from Mann. Took it from Ovid. Took it from Froben. Use, and from Spen. Glur. There were a whole group of influences, but Joyce was certainly one of the major ones. Joseph Campbell. Brought it up to them, and by God I got a marvelous contract. $250 on signing the contract, $250 when the book's hell finished. $250 on turning it in. So I worked for 4 or 5 years. What it was the Hero with 1,000 Faces. What it is my first lecture to my students at Sarah Lawrence College. And I wrote the presentation, got the contract, started work on this thing. While I was writing the introduction I would ready to. Jean, as I've read it in everything you do, and finally she said, that's getting to be a pretty long introduction. I went back and checked it over and just divided it into chapters and I had the first half of The Hero with 1,000 Faces. After 5 years or so I sent the manuscript up to Simon & Schuster. I didn't hear from them for months. I phoned up and they said, our staff had changed since we made the contract and we're not very much interested in the book. We will publish it, but if we publish a book that won't care for it's not very good for the book. I said, let me come up and talk about it and get the manuscript back. So I got the manuscript back and took it home. I phoned my friend Robinson. You see, I was young and ignorant and he was seasoned, and he said, I've taken back the manuscript and I'm going to send them their money back. He said, you send them the money and they'll crucify you. You just, thos bunch of bastards. They have you work for 5 years and then they throw you out. Sothene, another publisher, Kurt Wolff of Pantheon, Saida wanted to see the book. I gave it to him and he said, who read it? He had the grace to tell some Slatter he had also refused Spengler's Decline of the West when it wasn't him. Then he sent it to the Bollingen Foundation and they said, the Hero is a honey, and it's the Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's been out since 1949 and last year, 1984, I'm pleased to say, it sold 10,000 copies. That's a pretty good record for a book. That was rejected by 2 publishers. And that's how we got into writing. Abe. 120. The Boon. AUDIENCEQUESTION. Is there a basic pattern or list of tricks that you can talk about, since we have to at times be tricked to righteousness? It might be say don't know if there's some repeated patterns that you can identify. Campbell. There's a good list of them right here in the Jacob story, and if you want, the best thing that has been done on. It is by Joseph Campbell, Laughter, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. That's tellest, and I can tell you, when these things happen to you, and they happen every day, you can read them in terms of the myth, and you know where you are. That's the advantage of being mythologically indoctrinated. You know where you are when these stories take place. And they do. Read them notice. Something that happened out the rebut is something that is going to appento you and is happening to you. That's translating this material into spiritual food. Foe, YPQ greater than. Cusino. When did you first encounter Heinrich Zimmer? Campbell. Oh, my marvelous friend, Heinrich Zimmer. I can't say enough about that man. His father was one of the major. Embarked on my next Bollingen assignment. Also the proof stage, because the original editor had gone abroad. The book was Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, whose galleys I eagerly began to read as I took them home on the subway. An encounter with psychoanalysis made me see significance in every image. The encounter had been Freudian. Some time passed before I realized that the Bollingen Foundation had something to do with C.G. Jung, not to mention Paul Mellon. When I met Campbell over the Moorish coffee table, a swell went through the index I had been commissioned to make. He seemed the easiest person in the world to please. Thought the index, my first, ventured in directions far from index orthodoxy. The defection of the previous editor had thrown the publishing out and desolated Campbell, who would have welcomed almost any literate and willing substitute. My enthusiasm seemed to encourage him. When I commented on the aptness of the correspondence's head raced between symbolic instances drawn from many mythologies and folklores on one hand, and individual dreams and fantasies on the other, he exclaimed, yes. You see, it all jits. William Maguire, Bollingen. 121. The Hero's Journey. Alchemical imagery is one way of telling this same story in terms of getting the gold out of the base matter. The gold is captured in base matter, prima materia. And through the alchemical cooking and whatever else they're doing, pouring things in and so forth, the gold is brought out. And the gold is your own spiritual life that is clouded in the pure matter of your physical ests. The operation of the mythic meditation is to bring out, elicit, the gold of your spiritual character. You have to move into this slowly, and that's what ordeals are. The ordeal is a gradual clarification and purification of your life. Joseph Campbell. Greater than. Indologist Heinrich Zimmer. Right, and Paul Mellon, co-founder, with his wife Mary, of the Bollingen Institute. Mary Mellon wrote of Zimmer, when he's excited or has had a glass of Italian wine, he spouts vocabulary like Agassiz like Fame's Joyce. To hear him he's like watching Shankar dance. Itis mythology orchestrated. Celtic scholars of the generation before, and Heinrich was a major Indologist Holf Germany when Hitler came in. He couldn't stand what it all stood for. He came over here with his family and then he couldn't get a job. There were very few Oriental departments in the United States universities at that time. You know how. The faculty who's there want to stay there and they didn't win the competition. And so finally the ladies of the Young Foundation got him a room in Columbia University upon the top of the library. And there he was giving his lectures. I attended the first lecture and there were 4 people for Heinrich Zimmer's lecture. He lectured us the here lecturing tone auditorium. He was a magnificent deliverer of a lecture. I remember him saying to me, I'm glad you are getting this stuff. One of the other people present was the little librarian who was a person of the Young Foundation who had arranged for him to be there. Another was a Polish female sculptor who, when she came into the room, emitted a perfume that would have and all the gods told me to paradise. 122. The boon. That was it. The next semester Zimmer had to have a larger room and the next semester after the had an enormous room. And should denly the mandate. He caught a cold and wasted pneumonia. Nobody diagnosed it correctly, it was absurd. Suddenly Zimmer was gone. IOWE everything to Zimmer. His widow gave me a statue of a Bodhidharma from Japan when she asked me if I could edit his American lectures. So I spent, God, almost 12 years editing Zimmer material and brought out our magnificent works out of his notes. Fod. Q greater than. Zimmer continued quietly to bring prom icing Bollingenpro's Pextomerazad and Tion. One was Joseph Campbell, a clever and intuitive Irish man, energetic, sound and full of life, who knows a lot about Indian stuff. William Maguire, Bollingen, Campbell. And in doing so I became associated with the Bollingen Foundation, the Bollingen people and that whole young Ian world. When I finally wrote my hero it was refused by 2. A.R.S. Joseph Campbell and Jean Erdmann with R. F.C. Huvi, the translator of Carryon's works, on to St. Jeremy, on the Piazza, Ascona, Switzerland, 1954. 123. The Hero's Journey. Publisher Sandit was the Bollingen that picked it up. If they had not picked it up, I don't think anyone here would have heard of Joe Campbell. I'm sure of that. They kept me on course with grants while I edited Zimmer's work and did work of my own editing the Irano's lectures. It was that steadying along until somebody was interested in this kind of material until the day came when everybody was interested in it. You know, it's a wonderful thing having been thrown out with no job, hunting my own way. I found things that other people were going to need when they lost their way too. The saying a friend of mine has given me for letting me know when you were in late Middle Ages. You got to the top of the ladder and found it's against the wrong wall. Well, I think I found what it is you need to break through that wall. This is one of the delights of my experience. Campbell. Zimmer, in relation to the perilous bed in the Sir Gawain story, asked what's the meaning of an adventure of this kind? He said what is the masculine experience of the feminine temperament when it does not seem to have any rationale about it. At all? Just be patient, have patience, and endure. And, finally, he says, all the blessings of womanhood will be yours. This is something I kept in mind on one occasion. I was writing a great book on Indian art, a big 2-volume work based on Zimmer's posthumous work Art of Indian Asia. I had collected almost all the pictures necessary, but there were about 4 pictures that I couldn't find. Booty knew they would be in the file of the Indian art historian, Ananda K. Kumaraswamy, who had it a couple of years before. So I phoned his widow and said, I wonder if I can come up on lift through the doctor's file and see if I can get a couple of pictures? Come on up, she said. Soupy went one hot summer day in Boston, in Cambridge. I was admitted to the library where the pictures were. There was a huge mass of pictures but I thought it. 124. The boon. Wouldn't they've taken more than an hour or so to go through them? All and find the 4 that I knew were there. And they were there. So I sit down and I start going through the pictures and she comes in about half an hour and she says, oh, it's kind of wouldn't you like a little orange juice or something like that? I said, okay. So she sat down and a conversation developed that went on for about an hour and a half and then she left me to go on with the pictures. I was just getting into it again when she came in and said, you know I think it's about dinner time. So I said, all right. We had dinner and that brought us on into the evening and I'm going on and she said, Joe, it will be perfectly all right. You can spend the night here and just sleep on the couch there. It'll be perfectly okay. For 3 days this went on. And I just said to myself the whole time, here's the perilous bed and I'm going to stick it out. The superintendent thought we were having an affair and, well, anyhow, I got the pictures. So this is a little example of how valuable mythological information is in life situations. Brown. Can you give us a picture of what it would have been like to be Joe Campbell working on all the Seaman U scripts during those years? Campbell. I was teaching at the time, and the Sarah Lawrence teaching was a full day. It wasn't just a class and you were off. The full-time jobs were 4 full days a week. When I began writing I took a 3/4 schedule and taught for 3 days a week, and then I had 4 days for my writing. That was the balance. Then of course in the summer holiday days I had nothing but the writing. In the years from the time would publish a skeleton key to Finnegan's Wake in 1944 until I Retired from Sarah Lawrence, I published 15 mighty volumes. Big volumes. You can get a lot of work done if you just stay with a tender excited and it's play instead of work. I'm rather pleased with that record, actually. Just as anyone who listens to the muse will hear, you can write out of your own intention or out of inspiration. There is such a thing. It comes upand talks. And those who have heard deeply the rhythms and hymns of the gods, the words of the gods, can recite those hymns in such a way that the O greater than I, greater than willed, attracted. I Clample, 125. The Hero's Journey. Still another inspiration of Zimmersfoss, the idea of include tilde ing, along with Maud Okus's sandpaintings. And her transcriptive. Jeff King's account OJ the Navajo, ceremonial, a scholarly and entertaining commentary on Navajo myth, written by his pupil, Joseph Camp Bell, from the viewpoint of comparative mythology. He was destined to encounter Bollingen. William McGuire, Bollingen. Maud Oaks in Guatemala, 1946. Theorizing Wenton. I took the job of editing Zimmerand at the same time my Swami friend, Swami Nikhilananda, asked me to help him with the translation from Bengali of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. A great big book here on my shelf somewhere. So I was working day and night. I would write one book in the morning, one in the afternoon, and one in the evening. Actually, there were 3 things going at a time there sometimes. The first book that the Bollingen Foundation brought out was a study of a Navajo war ceremonial. Zimmerhader commended that I should write the introduction and commentary and edit the book. So that was another of my jobs. It was a real season of writing, and very, very exciting, and wonderful, wonderful. Material, 126. The Boon. And whether it was Finnegan's Wake or the Navajo material, or the Hindu material or Heinrich Zimmer's, it was all the same material. That was when I realized, and nobody can tell me anything differently, that there is any mythology in the world. It has been inflected in various cultures in terms of their historical and social circumstance and needs and particular local ethic systems, Buddhist one mythology. Foe. Campbell. Historians and ethnologists are interested in the differences of mythologies and religious systems of the world, and one can study the mythologies and philosophies of the world with an accent on these differences. On the other hand, the problem emerges off Bastian's elementary ideas. Why are they everywhere? This is a psychological problem, and it's a problem that separates use or discussion of the comparative forms from the whole. Research having to do with differences. What happened in the West following the period of Aristotle particularly was saw gradual attack on mythological ideas, so that criticism in the West tended to separate itself from the elementary ideas. However, there is Al's own undercurrent throughout Western thinking. It's associated with Gnosticism, alchemy, and many of the discredited manners of thought that carries on this interest in what might be called the perennial. I'm thinking of the perennial philosophy that has been expounded particularly by Ananda K. Coomaraswamy, and picked up, I think it was during the 1940s, by Aldous Huxley in that work of his, The Perennial Philosophy. I'm thinking of this as the translation and total discourse of the implications of the mythic images. And that's why the same ideas can be found in the mystical philosophies throughout the world. The continuities that might come over into philosophy. And the basic idea of the philosophy is that deities are symbolic personifications of the very images that are of yourself. And these energies that are of yourself are the energies of the universe. And so the God is out there and the God is in here. The kingdom of heaven is within you, yes, but it's also everywhere. 127. The Hero's Journey. The Book of Lindisfarne. Carpet page with scattered panels, late 7th century. Bhutan mandala wall painting, from the Drukpa Kagayupa Buddhist sect. Tashicho Zong, legislative meeting hall of the Bhutanese government. When you contemplate the mandala you are harmonized. Inside, the religious symbols are reharmo. Nizing powers. They help. That's the whole sense of mythology. To help you harmonize your individual life with the life of society. Joseph Campbell. No justice the idea of deity in the perennial traditions is greatly different from our idea of deity, so do est idea of consciousness differ. In speaking of deities in the terms that are proper to these mythologically grounded traditions, I say that the deity is a personification of the energy. It's a personification of an energy that informs life. A life, your life, the world's life. And the nature of the personification will be determined by historical circumstances. The personification as folk, the energy is human. And so deities proceed from the energies. And they are the messengers and vehicles, so to say, of the energies. And there is that wonderful passage in the Chandogya Upanishad, worship this God, worship that God, one God after another, those who follow this law do not know. Because the source of the gods is in your own heart. Follow the footsteps to that center and know that you are that which the gods are born on. Dream, vision, God. The gods of heaven and hell are what might be called the cosmic aspect of the dream. And the dreamus. 128. The boon. The personal aspect of the myth. Dream and myth are of the same order. And you and your God are one. This is you and your dream God. And your God isn't my God. So don't treat Topushit on me. Everyone has his own deity and consciousness. And this is what is known as the perennial philosophy. Now my th comes in the same zone as dream, and this is the zone of what I would call the wisdom body. When you go to sleep, it's the body that's talking. And what it is moved by are energies that it does not control. The Seereth energies that control the body. They come from the great biological ground, whatever. It may be protoplasm, the Yarathier, the Yar energies, and they are matters of consciousness. But we also have in this body, this Aferufir, the head, and ITHASA system of thinking of its own. And that's a whole manner of consciousness that stems from the headset, and it is different in its knowledge from that of the body. When a baby is born, it knows just what to do with its mother's body. It is ready for the environment into which it is put. It doesn't have to be instructed. The Sething Shaban, and this is the work of the wisdom body. That's a wisdom brought the little thing into form in its mother's body. It was shaped by these energies that lay in us, and of which we are the carnal manifestation. This wisdom of the dream, wisdom of the vision, is the wisdom then of the perennial philosophy. So that's what came of that. I'm writing all the time now. Ethereal sorrow is that it's cut down on my reading time. There's still a lot to learn. Brown. Over the course of your long career, Joe, what has been the most satisfying aspect of your work? Campbell. Form one of the most exciting and really moving things about mythology is this universality of certain things. It becomes particularly striking when you turn, let's say, from some very simple people like pygmies of the Congo and Tihen go to another very simple people, like the Yagan Oron or Tierra del Fuego, and find the same motifs coming along there. It's not so. 129. The Hero's Journey. My hope for the Prey End Book. 15 that its ancient art of Scheherazade, which has already charmed us, may so amplify your experience of the world, that, seeing ourselves in perspective, some of us all wish to rejoin the human race. Then, indeed, the reading of the complete 1001 Nights will have been our death, Astyrant, and refreshment. Tasman. Joseph Campbell, Introduction to the Portable Arabian Sites. Surprising when you are in the field, for example, of any of the great high culture systems, where we know that there has been great trade and diffusion of techniques and everything else from one place to another. But Hizother matter. You just wonder whether people have carried from primordial times, from the very beginning, motifs of this kind. One that I find most recurrent is of the Men's Secret Society, Men's Secret Rites, which usually involves some kind of bullroarer, a noise-making machine, a horn of some kind. There's a woo-hoo-hoo, and this is kept hidden in the woods. Women aren't supposed to know anything about it. Then Themen bring it out and they're going to have some ceremony, and the women are supposed to run away and hide and not see it. In some of the cases Themen become very brute alto any woman who does see it. This we find among the pygmies of the Congo, and we find it again down in the rainforests of Brazil. The same kinds of the Messiker and Tierra del Fuego. One explanation Thassa recently heard from some people that have been working in the Brazilian rainforest is that the idea of magic power which adheres in the horns is originally associated with women. We see that with the goddess Circe in the Odyssey, who had the magic power and the man just had the physical power. The little legend that one finds in 3 or 4 of these places, or perhaps all of them, is of Themen having stolen from the women the knowledge of the power of magic, and they are now keeping it from the women. Now we don't often hear from the women's side because the male anthropologists can get in touch with their actual women's thinking. But here is a couple who were studying the Beresana people in Brazil, a man and his wife, and she studied with the women. What I got from her learning was that the women are actually protecting their power against contamination by Themen's power when they go and hide. Theides that of women having power, the power in their body, the magic of their body, and men having to gain power. Now the sign of the women's power is menstruation. It is the wrath that the woman is taken over by a power, namely the power of nature, biology. And the men are treated in their initiations brutally so that the two will open up. Themen's instruments are equivalent to the women's menstruation. That is to say, something. 130. The boon, transcendent of the intentions of the individual, is moving in. It's at that field of the overtaking of the individual by mythic energy. Or a biological energy, any kind of energy, but at the overtaking is the point where ritual comes in mythic forms. Faux? Canard. How do you explain the similarity of image and ritual as many cultures? A real one humankind, really? High water. The world is full of biological inequities, but I do think that there are things that make for a kind of spiritual unity. Booty think the notion has overtaken Nusto such a degree hat. We are beginning to confuse conformity and equality. That's a dreadful mistake, I think, another form of Western imperialism. I certainly agree with Campbell that we all have a touch of that orenda, that flame, within us, that is all the same fire. But what interests me is the ways in which that fire, those different images, is cast up on the world in which we live. Gillimon. With all we know of the structure of the brain, regardless of where then neurophysiologist cuts, there is no evidence that the fundamental wiring of the brain is different, whether you were born as a Hottentot, Melanesian, or Caucasian from one place or another. The wiring of the brain is absolutely the same. High water. I think there's no question that the Muralsoft, the Dreamtime people of Australia and those of Altamira have absolutely nothing in common. The appearance is superficial, not fundamental. When we're looking at Irliard, we're looking at superficially, not fundamentally. Because I think the differences begin to occur at a very early time between cultures. Campbell. Well, there are certain basic biological experiences that people have to undergo. For instance, in most culture circumstances, the first object, first subject, after an individual is born, is the mother body, and the whole system of references of the female body is pretty consistent throughout the mythologies of the world. And you have culture transformations. For instance, you have a people who are hunting and gathering people and then come. 131. The hero's journey. People who are planting. The position of the female in relation to the productivity of the earth will change, and the mythology will change, and the imaging will change, but there is that basic thing. Particularly in the initiation of young boys, one of the problems is to disengage the boy's libido from the mother's body. This is undertaken in the boy's initiation rites by various men's in various cultures, but it's the same problem that all are facing. In the first 12 years of a human being's life, he or she is in a position of dependency on authority. Then the whole psychology is that of respect for authority, expectation of approval, disapproval, all that kind of thing. One of the functions of the rituals against to kill that infantile ego. Then you have a death rebirth motif. So the individual falls into the ground of his own being and comes out an adult, a responsible adult, who's undergone certain transformations. The way the body is mutilated will change from one people to another, but the mutilation of the body goes on. Then you have another situation where the persona is being disengaged from the society and moving into old age. There is another constant situation that the human being has to face. The present constants. It is not always easy to recognize it. These constants are modified in their manifestation, what I called, when I was quoting Adolf Bastian, the difference between the elementary idea, the universal motive for form, and its local manifestation. The local manifestation will change enormously when you move, let's say, from an Arctic people to a people in the jungle, or from a very simple gathering tribe to the Persian Empire. The imagery is going to change a lot, and much of the conflict that you recognize between two tribes in the Andes thought are every close together is the result of background experiences they brought in from elsewhere. They are living closer together, but the same culture. Form meets them and then they transform it in their own utilization. Less than Ba. Audiencequestion. I'm curious about the title of your book, Myths to Live By. What my THS can we live by today, and what realm of life can my freely apply to on a workable, everyday? 132. The boon level? And how can my views to manipulate other people's lives, or your own life, for better or for worse? I think I've missed the point somewhere. Campbell. Learning how to manipulate people by myth is something I am not very much interested in. But the person in most ancient times who was most successful in this was Hitler. He also knew how to handle ritual. I have a couple of Dutch friends who were in concentration camps, and when Hitler was to give his speech in the neighborhood where their place was, they were burrowed out and had to stand at attention while he gave his speech. And one of them told me that the huddle he could do to keep his right hand from going up and saying Heil. The powerful well-constructed ritual to move you from some centers that are beyond those of your personal, intentional control is terrific. We've lost all sense of that. We just didn't know anything about that. But there comes Salmon with that genius for that kind of thing, and look what happens. With respect to yourself, Myths to Live By was based on a series of 25 or so lectures I gave over the course of 25 years, 1958 to 1971, at the Cooper Union Forum in New York City. They were dealing with subjects that had been proposed to me by Johnson Fairchild, the man directing that series. They were all subjects that did have relevance to people's lives at that time. That was a long time ago. I have forgotten even what the chapters of the book are. Booty can remember that there was the problem of mythology in relation to love, mythology in relation to war, mythology in relation to the transformations of puberty, and all that kind of thing. There is plenty of mythological material roundabout. We're living in a period that regard us a kind of period of the terminal moraine of mythology. It's a lot of mythological rubbishes all around. Mythologies that build civilizations and are no longer working in that way are just in rubble all around us. So an individual will put himself to the task of activating his imaginative life, the life that springs from inside, not from response to outside information and commands. That person can find stimulation in this wonderful literature that is pouring into the libraries. Now the world is full of these wonderful things again. 133. The hero's journey. So there is no rule. An individual has to find what electrifies and enlivens his own heart and wakes him. Audiencequestion. The end, you should actually try and follow the poetic or spiritual feelings that you feel welling up within yourself. Campbell. I think that the world of the arts and literature, what we call the liberal arts, is the world in which to find all this. One has to pursue something like that. Now what a religion does, in an Orthodox church for 1 or so a week, is that one goes and puts oneself in an environment that is supposed to awake that system again. Then you go out and do the chores, and you go back to church again, or you're supposed to say your prayers in the morning and evening, which means putting yourself in touching with those centers. But if religion hasn't put you in touch with those centers, it's somebody else's religion, really, and well, then you're cut off, and it's so no for problems. J.B.C. Brown. Recently on the talk show circuit you had an ordeal while you were launching the way of animal powers. Campbell. You meant the metaphor story. Brown. Yes, that was a fascinating vignette that sounded as if I helped to inspire subsequent work. Campbell. Sure, I love to tell that story. A simple realization came to me last year with respect to this whole problem of the function and relevance of myth to life. When The Way of Animal Powers was published, the pub Lisher sent me on a publicity tour. It's the worst kind of tour to go on because you're talking with people who don't know anything about the subject that you've devoted the book to. And the first question they would ask, normally, is, what is Ameth? Finally I had thought of the definition that I thought would hold them. Of course, I knew that nobody knew what it was anyhow, but it would sound like a definition. And so toward the end of this tour I committed. I won't say what city it was nor who it was, but it was a talk show, 134. The Boone. Half hour, live, on radio. Andy walked into the room, and the red light is noted, so I can have a little conversation. And the first thing this young man sitting across the table says to me is, I'm tough, he says. I'll put you try to you, no fooling. He says, I've studied law. So, alright, that's okay with me. Then the red light goes on and he starts out with this popularity. He says, myth is a lie. Amy this alley, isn't he? I said, no, you must talk about a mythology, a whole mythology by which people live. A mythology is an organization of symbolic narratives and images that are metaphorical of the possibilities of human experience and fulfillment in a given society at a given time. Of course, that was out the window already. It's a metaphor. About 5 minutes ago, I realized, this young man does not know what a metaphor is. So I felt I could be tough too, you know. I've got them in a hammerlock, you might say, Ani's not going to get out. I said, no, I'm telling you that myths share metaphors. Give me an example of a metaphor. You give me an example of a metaphor, he says. I taught school for 38 years, so I said, no, I'm asking the questions this time. Give me an example of a metaphor. Well, the poor man fell apart. I felt ashamed. You don't do things like this to people. Nietzsche has a saying, I think it's thus spake Zarathustra, or the will to power, about the pale criminal, the one who has the courage of the knife but not of the blood. And now I had no courage to face what I had on to this young man on his show, live to his public. The show wasn't his name. Hefe apart, and he said, I don't know what Odo. Wait a minute. Then he comes up from the floor, we now have about a minute and a half for 2 minutes to go, and says, I'll tree. He says, so and so runs very fast. People say he runs like a deer. I said, that's not the metaphor. Tick, tick, tick goes the clock. The metaphor is, son soit a deer. 135. The hero's journey. That's a he said, that's a metaphor. Quote. I said, that's the end of the show, and that got in tone. It is simple. People say they believe in God. God's a metaphor for a mystery that absolutely transcends all human categories of thought. Even the categories of being and non-being. Those very categories of thought. It's as simple as that. It depends on how much you want to think about it. Whether he's putting you in touch with the mystery that is the ground of your own being. It isn't, well, it's silly. So half the people in the world are religious people who think that their metaphors are facts. Those are what we call theists. Theoth are half-fair people who know that the metaphors are not facts and Southerlies. Thos are the atheists. Campbell. I had a fantastic experience with Martin Buber. He was lecturing in New York to a group of about this size, a series of 3 Wednesday evenings. He was an eloquent man. The first evening was talking about God, and it dawned on me I didn't know what he was talking about. Was he talking about the mystery that now lies behind the galaxies and the subatomic particles? Or was he talking about one or another period in the development of Yahweh in the Old Testament? Or was she talking about someone with whom he was shaving a personal conversation? He stopped Tashani moment and said, it pains me to speak of God in the third person. When I told this to Gershom Scholem, he said, sometimes she goes too far. So I'm sitting there, and he raised my hand and very politely said, what is it? And he said, there's a word being out here this evening that I'm not understanding. And he said, what is that word? And he said, God. You don't understand what God means? I don't understand what you mean by God. You tell us God. 136. The Boone. Hash it in his face. Ivy just come from India. Fairy people are experiencing God's face all the time. It was Sasta at high thim with a brick. He said, do you mean to compare? That's monotheism. We've got it. No one else has it. And then the next week, this wonderful little man, he's marvelous. He's saying very nasty things about the Phoenicians because they're killing Theroldistans for Moloch. Sacrificing Theroldistus to Moloch. Terrible thing to do. 15 minutes. Latter Hajay's around to Abraham about to sacrifice Isaac, and now. This is the greatest tact anybody in the world had ever given himself. 2. Thesis, the key act indicating what a wonderful man Abraham was. And I couldn't help it. I raised my hand again and I said, Dr. Buber, How does one distinguish between the divine and a diabolical invitation? He said, what do you mean by that? I said, 15 minutes ago you were excoriating the Phoenicians for sacrificing Therildas to deity. No, you're praising Abraham above all living for having to do the same thing. Now comes the answer. We, capital W, believe that God, capital G, spoke to Abraham. Vadisha's answer, so where are you? Thesis: the problem in dealing with mythology in a monotheistic community. It's not myth, it's fact. Thesis: the concretization of asymbolic. It's losing the message in the symbol. You've lost the message. All you get is a symbol. And so everybody who says, I and the Father are one, or as the Muslim mystic Halaf said, I and my beloved are one, gets crucified. I think it was Halaj who said the function in the Orthodox community is to give the mystiche's desire, namely union with his God. Kill him, he strengthen, Liebstad, the love death. You're united with the beloved. Thesis: a tremendo subjectand. It's played a loud tune through the centuries. There are a number of people who have burned to death for celebrating the iridentity with the divine. The Nu cross Suez into the Orient, and the whole goal of religion is to realize that you are one with that which you seek to know. You are it. Souther, you have the difference between religions of identification and religions of relationship. Identification with the divine. Relationship with the divine. 137. The hero's journey. Our highest goddess. Our highest abstract. Tion. It represents the consummation of the highest thoughts and feelings that you can have. Go past that. Meister Eckhart says, the ultimate leave-taking is the leave-taking of God for God. The Tistose, the folk God. For God, Thatistose. The elementary idea. Joseph Campbell. Campbell. A man spoke at Theotherday, Avery Intelligentman, a man who was a man of considerable dignity in our literary world, an agnostic. Heasked, are you possibly an agnostic? I said, I know too much to be an agnostic. What I know is that all of these images are metaphors. And they're metaphors for what? A metaphor has a connotation, and the mythic metaphors have connotations of the spiritual powers within the individual. And when one is preaching religion, if you're not preaching the connotation of the metaphor, you're preaching pseudo-history or sociology or something of that kind. So there's very little true religion in the world. Well, what could I do? I could only write another book. So I interrupted the work on my big historical atlas of world mythology to write another book which should come out someday. Hopefully soon. Brown. Is thought thou the inner reaches of outer space game about? Campbell. You know when you write a book you get it off your chest and you somehow forget what's in it. I'm not sure. I can't tell you. Very well, what it is that I have put into that book has to do with describing how the metaphors are used. I have found, or known, in Navajo's and painting that in its symbology duplicated almost point for point the symbology of the Hindu Kundalini Yoga. Now these come from two totally different parts of the world. There cannot have been any diffusion or any influence whatsoever. They represent asymbology of the psychology of the human system in symbolic terms. The Navajo understand it symbolically, and they tell you how top participate in it and how the symbols actually work upon you. The first big chapter deals with the inner reaches of outer space. IUSE, the moonshots and all that is my key. You get a picture of the cosmos as we now have it, with hundreds of thousands of galaxies, and each galaxy as big as the Milky Way. Hundreds of light years of distances. Then you come to the myth of the ascension of Jesus to heaven and of the assumption of the Virgin. Now, 138. The boon. Either you throw it out and say it's symbolic of something. And what it is symbolic of is this flight to inner space. And its render it is outward, but you're going to the place from where life came, your own deep ground of being. So I deal with the interpretation of mythic images in that sense. The introduction of the book, which I call Myth in the Body, picks up and makes fundamental my basic feeling that myth is a function of biology. It speaks of the energies that move the consciousness. They are all determined by the organs of the body. They do not all have the same intentions, other conflicts and dissonances. But myth has to do the harmonization of one's consciousness in relation to the ground of being in nature, in the body, which is its alpha manifestation of a mystery. It's a big subject, as you don't want to touch on this picked off. It just opens out and offers new mysteries, provided you follow it in terms of connotations instead of simply denotations. The denotations just didn't work, that's all. And you think religious people know that didn't work, and that's why they're so damn arrayed and dogmatic about you having to believe what I believe, because if you don't then perhaps I'm wrong. They just didn't know how to read the symbols. Thesis: the whole thing in my own life in relating to the Catholic religion, which have been brought up in all the meditations, have to deal with something that happened 2,000 years ago somewhere else at somebody else. Unless those can be read as metaphorical of what ought to happen to him, that I ought to die and resurrect, die Tomiego Andres erect to my divinity, it doesn't work. Then the last chapter, the one I regard as the culminating one in the book, was inspired by a remark from my wife, Jean. One day when we were talking about things like this, she said, the way of the mystic and the way of the artist are very much alike, except that the mystic doesn't have the craft. IUSE, that is the key here for paralleling the two ways of the mystical life and the artist life. The artist with the craft remains in touch with the world. The mystic can spin off and lose touch, and frequently does. And so it seems. Toby that the artist the higher form. I thought Jean Putterfinger right on it. Mythology's an organization of symbolic image and narratives metaphorical of the possibilities and fulfillment in a given culture in a given time. Mythology's a metaphor. God, angels, purgatory, the sea were metaphors. Joseph Campbell, interviewed in the New York Times, February 1985. 139. If the heroine he's triumph wins the blessing of the goddess. Orthogodandes then. Explicitly commas. Scion to return to the world with some elixir for the restorer. Tion of society, the final stage of his adventure is supported by all the powers of his supernatural patron. On the other hand, if the trophy has been attained against the opposition OFIT's guardian, or if the hero's wish to return to the world has been resented by the gods or demons, then the last stage of the mythological round becomes a lively oft and comical pursuit. This flight may be complicated by marvels of magical obstruction and evasion. Joseph Campbell, the hare with 1,000 faces. Q greater than O. 77Z Magic Flight. FORTWOYEARSINTHEMID 1950S. Joseph Campbell taught courses in Oriental philosophy at the State Department in Washington, D.C. The strong reception he received from the diplomats was helping prepare for overseas assignments gave him his first clue thought they had something vital to teach people other than students and scholars. His next clue came in 1968 when Michael Murphy invited him to teach at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. Over the next 19 years Campbell co-taught classes there with writer Sam Kean, Tai Chi master Chunglang Aluong, psychologist John Weir Perry, and many others, constantly widening the scope of his approach to mythology. Campbell resumed his travels after retiring from Sarah Lawrence as professor emeritus in 1972. Over the next years journeyed to Iceland and Turkey, Egypt and Greece and Medea. Long tour through Southeast Asia. The fourth and final volume of his 20-year project, the 4-volume The Masks of God, was published in 1968. It was a study of the historical development of mythology and the religious differences of humankind, designed to complement the hero with 1,000 Faces, a portrait of intriguing correspondences. It was followed 4 years later by Myths to Live By, a collection of his lectures at the Cooper Union Forum in New York, and in the same year he published The Portable Jung. In 1974, he published The Mythic Image, the capstone book of the Bollingen series. 141. Brown. You know, Joe, I've driven up and down this equals Northern California coast with you and had a tremendous time reminiscing as we came down to Carmel, to the nooks and sea rannies that you had been in as a young man. Boot even no idea how you got here to S. Allen originally. Campbell. I guess it was about 16 or 17 years ago, 1968. Alan Watts suggested to Mike Murphy had he's me to come down here. I think that was about the time that Esalen was beginning. I was flying to Milwaukee and there was an hour break in San Francisco between my flights. Mike came me up to eat that time, together with Richard Price, and asked me if I would come down here. Ali did was lecture on mythology, right here in this room. This was about all there was at that time. Apparently people liked what I was doing, so I kept coming back. Viewed a big advance, a big change came along when Sam Kean came to visit one time in New York and we decided we'd do something here together. We had a theory. Sam was very good at finding out where people are even they're stuck when they're in trouble. I don't think you have to go through deep psychoanalysis for that. There is just some kind of idea that's blocking you. Remove the dia, the persona is released. That's a good mythological principle. In India demons are simply obstructors of consciousness, those things that block consciousness. Wahadari did that Sam would be able, by interviewing people in India log with them, to find where they were stuck. And that I would be able to find and recognize the mythological analog to their problem. It was a nice theory and nobody was going to get ortond. It actually worked. We had 3 or 4 events that were really spectacular. And that was the first time that I really came to understand the relationship of my scholarship, which was simply about mythology, to actual psychological problems. 142. The Magic Flight. And it's been going fine ever since. Brown. It's or is. B.D. P9. Brown. As a psychiatrist, I'm particularly curious about your work with John Perry. How did you first meet them? Campbell. That was a marvelous meeting. Mike wrote to him one time and said he'd like me to come out and talk with John Perry, a psychiatrist in San Francisco, about schizophrenia. I said, I don't know anything about schizophrenia. He said, well, he'd like to have me give a lecture anyhow. I said, well, how would James Joyce be? And he said, that would be just fine. So I agreed to come out and talk with John Perry. And Perry sent me some of his monographs, his articles, on the symbolism of schizophrenia. The sequence with which these images emerge in a patient's mind who's in a deep schizoid crack up. And it matched the hero with 1,000 faces, just like that, step by step. And so there again I came to understand the relationship with something that had been simply a scholarly interest of mine. In mythology to actual life problems. And it's been pretty exciting ever since. Brown. That's really how you go tack acquainted with you. In the middle of the 1970s, read a book of yours, Primitive Mythology from the Masks of God, and it sounded like what my patients in psychoanalysis were telling me. Campbell. Yes. That marvelous. Actually, I guess the big crisis in my popular career came in the 1960s when people were taking LSD and my book The Hero with 1,000 Faces became a kind of triptych or mythological map for the hippies. For more than 20 years, Joseph breathed new life into Esalen. Seminar participants, staff, and works call ARSA like came away from his seminars like people from Revival meetings, inspired by Galahad, Kali, or Hermes, rather than visions of hellfire. No one wrote their audience est other feet like headed. No one I'm. Esalen's story joined enthusiasm, scholarship, and was Doms of Yulee. Michael Murphy. 143. The Hero's Journey. Campbell lecturing animated Lido an audience of diplomats at the Foreign Service Institute in Washington, D.C., 1957. Kennard. Do you remember any people who came me up after your lectures and asked you something which made you say to yourself, oh, my God, I have 30 seconds to tell them the true meaning of life? Campbell. Laughing. No, I haven't that problem. Kennard. Do you remember ever going up to somebody and actually asking them? Campbell. No, I don't ask questions like that. I'm usually asked, laughter. One of the worst things, though, is after having given a lecture and taking questions from the audience, somebody comes up to you afterwards with his whole soul in this thing. That's the hardest thing to handle. The others are writing PhD theses and they want specific book references, things like that. Those are the only real annoyances on this job. TARNAS. So, PhDs and soul searchers. What are some of the PhDs that people are writing? Serious or straight stuff? 144. The Magic Flight. Campbell. Well, you'd be amazed at what people are getting PhDs for writing. Laughter. I knew a chap who was doing a thesis on the use of semicolons by Milton and Hisson nets. Kennard. On DXU about that? Campbell. No, he told me about that. It's a funny business, actually. Kennard. Joe, what are some of the more interesting questions that you've heard after your lectures? Did any of the questions people ask you just out of the blue at the end of your lectures ever introduce you to something new? Campbell. The most interesting question I ever got was when I was lecturing here at Esalen in the Abraham Maslow room in 1967. Somebody asked, what about the symbolism of the weight deck of tarot cards? Well, I hadn't thought about it. I'd seen Tarot packs Andy. Can remember my old master, Heinrich Zimmer, giving lectures on cards. Andy remembered a couple of things she'd said. So I said, well, give me a tarot pack and let me take it back to my room and I'll say in the morning what he found. That was a very exciting thing. IHAD the Luctor cognize a couple of sequences there. There is one for the 4 ages of man, youth, maturity, age, and what Dante calls senility. Heal socials. IT decrepitude. Dante discusses this at length in his Convivio. Thenabo Vedat I saw another sequence where there was a woman pouring water or something from a blue vessel in toward one and this was called temperance. And the next one was the devil, hell. And the next was a thunderbolt hitting a tower, the Tower of Destruction, which is the traditional sign for purgatory, you know, the Tower of Evil being smashed by the thunderbolt of God's destruction of all our bad ecosystem relationships. And the fourth one was the beginning of life, paradise, the 2 red vessels being poured out to the world below. Dante's La Vita Nuova, the new life pouring from the physical into the spur ideal vessel. Put hose 4 here, put the other 4 here, and the whole thing fell out into a beautiful system, interpreting the transformation of the psychological relations hips through not only the 4 stages of a lifetime, but also in the shift of accent from purely earthly to high spiritual ideas. The 4 suits are interesting because this is a medieval pack. The first evidence of the tarot we have is from about 1392, 145. The Hero's Journey. The Marseille Tarot deck. After his examination of the Weight deck at Esalen Institute, Campbell's imagination was seized by the Marseille deck with its richmond of medieval imagery. Reprinted from Joseph Campbell and Richard Roberts, Tarot. Revelations. Vernal Equinox Press copyright 1979, 1987, Richard Roberts. 146. The Magic Flight. A pack that was made for King Charles I of France. This was shortly after Dante's death, but where in the same field as Dante. It's also medieval. The 4 suits are swords, which are the aristocrats, the nobility. Cups, which are the clergy of the Catholic Mass. Coins, which are the moneyed estate, and batons or staves, which are of the peasants. Thus were the forecasters of medieval tradition. Now there are advantages in a lifetime. Nice the stage of entering life, which reaches a climax around 35 or 40, and the second is a stage of leaving life. And the 4 suits have DO with entering life in one or another of your occupations, whatever your task might be. And then the big set at the end, the honor suit, the major arcana, has to do with the mystical path. It were to do just like that. ITW is right in front of my face. It was a fascinating experience, the most interesting I have had here. Kennard. What interests me here is that somebody came up to you and first turned you onto the tarot just by a question. You explained the honor suit and you explained that it told you where you were in life and soon. So what? Why was that sucha turn on when somebody turned you on to this and you saw where you were in life? Does that affect us now? Why did you get a sudden flash and say to yourself, oh, yes? Campbell. It's a pack of cards that's just in fortune telling, you know, in reading character and so forth. And as it straight ended itself out as I saw it there, what it represented was a program for life that derived from European medieval consciousness, and actually carried into symbolic form many of the implications of Dante's philosophy. That was the one that really hit me. Dante died in 1321, and the earliest evidence we have of cards of this kind come from sermons around that date, against the cards, and you wonder, why against cards? You find out why when you look this thing over. It's basically agnostic philosophy. That's there. To make the point, there's a notion in Orthodox Christianity that the end of the world is coming. This is a mythological symbol, the end of the world, interpreted in terms of a historical event. For the Orthodox Christian, it's got to be a historical event. But mythological symbols do not talk about historical events, they talk about spiritual events. The end of the world is a spiritual event, not a historic alone. Now there's a gospel that's known now as the fifth gospel, the gospel according to Thomas. It was dug up in the Egyptian desert about 1945. Toward the close of that gospel the disciples 147. The hero's journey, asked, Master, when will the kingdom come? And the answer Jesus gives there is in great contrast to what you get in Mark 13. Where the king was going to come with clouds and all this kind of thing, and wars and everything else. Here Jesus says, the king. Dom will not come by expectation. They will not say, see here, see there. The kingdom of the Father is spread up on the earth and men do not see it. That's what's known as the Hermetic Gnosticism. Bodhi, in Sanskrit. Change the perspective of your eyes, and you see the whole world before you now is radiant. Do you see? In this Tarot that's the doctrine that comes out. The last figure, called the world, is the dancing female figure of the alchemist Siddhamandorla. In the four corners of the cards are the apos. T-less, the signs of the apostles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In other words, the coming is right here, now, in the world, and not at all something to wait for, not for a historical experience. That's within me, ARRIEN. Do you believe in the tarot? You can read the cards. But do you believe what you read when you use them? Campbell. No, I don't do anything like that. I just see. I can show you how it works and what a beautiful thing it is. ARRIEN. But you don't believe that it could tell you anything? Campbell. It gives you a program for life, what the concerns are in the different stages of life and what the spiritually lower and spiritually higher attitudes are toward the experiences of life at different stages. It's a wonderful thing. ARRIEN. DOYOU feel that you can see the kingdom here? Campbell. Sure you can. There was an old preacher back in the Depression, the Deep Depression, Father Divine. He used to give wonderful sermons, you know, and then he'd say, can't you see the mystery, ain't you glad? And everybody would say, yes. Lord. Well, can't you? ARRIEN. Yes. Yes. Marvelous. Campbell. Yes. It's just that you're not taught that this is it. That's the big problem. I don't think there's behind it. It's just that this is not an idea that is in our culture history. It's been screened out for one reason or another and unless you get it. You don't, of yourself, come to the realization. But just get a little. 148. The Magic Flight. Clue, and this tarot is one. ... And then there is nothing difficult about it. ARRIEN. You've also saw that the tarot was accessible. Was that through the church? Campbell. I don't know about that. I don't know what the actual situation was. There are just these few clues, as far as I know, from the 14th century to let you know that something was coming in. Another thing about this is that a lot of people have the idea comes from Egypt. It's sheerly medieval, the symbolism is medieval, it's the European idea. Foe. Brown. Does this inability to see the kingdom here and now have something to do with our disastrous relationship to nature? Campbell. Let's see. There's a trend in our whole religious tradition toward ethical rather than metaphysical insights. You know, good and devil and all that kind of thing. In our tradition one doesn't trust nature because nature has fallen. There is the God of creation and the nawfal so that life is mixed of good and evil. You can't lean on nature, you're always correcting it, you're always making an ethical standpoint, good against evil, you know? Think of the contrast with Taoism, where you yield to nature and give yourself to nature. Or primitive cultures where people rest well in nature. And it makes for a total transformation of consciousness toward Lee's nature is good. And thesis what I felt and learned in Japan. There is a saying in the Shinto religion, the processes of nature cannot be evil. And then you turn to Heraclitus and Heraclitus says to God. All things are good and right and just, but for some men some things are right and some are not right. Anza. Metaphysics. ARRIEN. How did you learn this? What happened that showed you? Campbell. I was in Japan studying Buddhism and Shinto, 1954 to 1955, and these things come out in the text. I remember. 149. The Hero's Journey. Campbell at the Giza Pyramids, 1976. Worship, worship, worship. People come in from all over. India, a great pilgrimage place. The whole idea of pilgrimage here is translated into a literal, physical act, the pilgrimage of moving into the center of your own heart. It is good to make a pilgrimage if while you're doing so you meditate on what you are doing and know that it's into your inward life that you are moving. Joseph Campbell. The feeling I had there. What a pleasure it is to be in a place that never heard of the fall. I used to say to my friends, if you are thinking of psychoanalysis, save the money and go to Japan. It clear sawaya na full of rubbish. I just totally fell in love with it. And when you're in love like that you have no pain. Favorite. Buddhism or society so structured that individual ally you have a hard time breaking out and being independent? Campbell. I don't know the answer to that. I was just there for about 7 months. Andy thought it does one no harm. To have a structure. At least you keep your agonias to yourself. People smile whether they're happy or not, and that's very nice. Perhaps a certain amount of individual freedom is not quite desirable. Another wonderful thing is the railroad train. If train is 2 minutes late, there's a public apology over the public address for being 2 minutes late. When you get on that bullet train and you're going at, what is it, 150 or 200 miles an hour, something like this, and it's a steady as that, you know? When you get in one of our trains, my God, there's zone. I took from New York City north to Stamford, and there you are, rattling along, sitting there in the dining car, and when it comes into Stamford the train tips and everything goes onto the floor. And the wonderful old porter comes in and says, every time we come to Stamford this happens. Faux. PCY. Favorite. Do you think there is too much freedom in our particular culture? Campbell. No, I'm not saying those things. I'm just saying how nice it is to be in Japan. What I learned there is about this trust for nature. You can't tell where our biggest nature and nature leaves off. In Japan things just override from one to the other in the temples and shrines. They're always in accord with the local nature. The gardens of Japan are arranged, like the ones in Kyoto, Sanzen-in, K6 Zanji, Ryo-in-ji, among others, so that as you go in the garden you are climbing up and suddenly a whole new vista opens. 150. The Magic Flight. Joseph Campbell, a Japanese friend on the castle grounds of Fukuoka. In the foreground is fellow religious historian and mythologist Mircea Eliade and his wife, Christine, 1958. Daisetsu Suzuki at Matsugoka Library, Kamakura, 1959. Flagstones. Katsura Palace Grounds, Kyoto, Japan. In Japanese gardens you don't know where art begins and nature ends. Living in Japan is such a pleasure. Because the sea repeo. PLE with very strong aesthetic accents. And everywhere you look you experience the radiance, at least I do. And that is really the earthly paradise. I think that the Japanese artists are the ones living out Buddhism even more than the monks nowadays. The world of art is the earthly path. Joseph Campbell. 151. The Hero's Journey. It's arranged so that you get an amplification of consciousness just by experiencing that garden. This union of the spiritual and physical intensity is so great. Now I was in athletics when I was in college and a couple of years afterward too, but it was just athletics. When you go in for career or something like this, and you realize there's spiritual psychological attitudes, placements, all that, there's so important. Everything works that way in that part of the world. There is at the reference of religion is psychological, what happens to you? We have the question of what happened in Jerusalem in 30 AD and did it really happen? What's that got to do with anything? There's a marvelous little story that is at Suzuki, the Zen philosopher, brought up in one of his talks in Zen Hedel Sofa, young man who asked his guru, Amy in possession of Buddha consciousness. And the guru said, no, and the young man said, well, I heard that all things are in possession of Buddha consciousness. The stones, the trees, the flowers, the birds, the animals, and all beings. Yes, said the master, you are correct. All things are in possession of Buddha consciousness. The stones, the flowers, the bees, the birds, but not you. Why not me? Because you're asking the question. That is to say, instead of living in the knowledge of himself from that transcendent source, he's living in the knowledge of himself as a separate unit. And that throws him off. So he isn't living out of his Buddha consciousness. Now that's the trick for an artist, to present this material so that it doesn't puttering around itself and stand theory is separate from you, the observer. And that aha that you get when you see an artwork that really hits you is, I am that. I am the every radiance and energy that is talking tone through this thing. In purely empirical terms it's scaled participation. Buddhi is more than that, it's identification. You know the hind you ask, wam I? Asking this is a big discipline. Am I this body? I was once giving a lecture to a group of prep school boys in Buddhism, and he wondered, how could I render this idiotathum? Because what is called the Buddha consciousness is the one consciousness of which we are all manifestations. We are all Buddha things. We're real separate manifestations of this great consciousness that informs the whole universe. The 152. The Magic Flight. Plants are conscious. The stones are conscious. All things are conscious. So I said to the boys, look at the ceiling. You can say the lights, plural, Arion, or you can say the light is on. The are two ways of saying exactly the same thing. The lights are onus accenting the individual vehicle, the bulb, and the light is on ice accenting the general light. But they are two ways of saying exactly the same thing. Now in Japan, the accent on the individual thing is called the jihakai, or the individual realm, and the accent on the general is called the ryokai, the general realm. And there's a little saying, ji-ri mu ji, individual, general, no obstruction. No difference. So, when one light breaks, the superintendent of buildings announces in Z, oh, I was particularly fond of that bulb. That was the important tone. This is a calamity. He takes it out, puts another bulb in. What is important? Is it the light or the vehicle? They are the vehicles of consciousness. So which are you? Area the head or are you the consciousness? With what do you identify yourself? With the vehicle or with what is carried? And if you can identify yourself with what is carried, namely consciousness, that's the consciousness that's in all the bulbs. And so you are identifying yourself with that which is the unifying principle, and that's what the person identifies himself with who goes to save another person spontaneously. The Sira to approach etherealization that separateness is secondary and the separateness is a function of the experience within time and space. When I was a kid walking through the woods, I'd come every now and then, as everyone will, tow a barbed wire fence and the barbed wire detruns alongside it and leans right up against a tree so that the tree will have enclosed it. The tree took the barbed wire into account. Or you cut yourself and the white corp USCLES come. You can interpret these things mechanically or you can interpret them in terms of actual will. Foe. 30 pounds. 153. The Hero's Journey. TARNAS. The Christian tradition compared to the Bud. DHIST traditions aims to lack a certain understanding of mythic symbols. Now I wondering whether that would be true only of Orthodox institutional Christianity, and whether there's in Christianity itself some sort of core of mythic understanding that is just as valid as in Hinduism or Buddhism. Campbell. The problem here is that in Hinduism or Buddhism the historical interpretation of the symbols, therefore ends to the life of the Buddha, is quite secondary. The accent in Hinduism and Buddhism is the relevance of the symbolic forms to your own life. You understand these references inward to your self. For instance, most of the Buddha had no historical existence at all, nobody thinks they ever had. To the Chinese, Kuan Yin, or to the Japanese, Kuanon, the great bodhisattva of inexhaustible compassion, is a purely mythic figure but represents something. Whereas in the Christian traditions the accent is on the historical understanding of the terms, of the images. If you say to a Christian, Jesus did not resurrect from the dead physically, did not ascend to heaven, that's a challenge to who regards as important in his faith. With the Jews, if you beg into question the holding of the Exodus and Moses going on the mountain, coming back with the law, and then breaking it, and going back for a second edition. If you express doubts about all this is a direct hit. The importance for the Hindu would be not what happened 2,000 or 3,000 years ago somewhere else. But what is happening to you now? What is the symbol doing to you now? Now since both Judaism and Christianity are myth, a logically structured orders of symbol, they are susceptible to the other kind of reading, and that comes breaking through every now and then with a prophet or a mystic when he suddenly sees the symbol is saying something totally different, and it's something that has to do with an immediate attitude of you to life. For instance, with the crucifixion, if you think of this as a calamity that is the result of your sons and Adam's and handle that Jesus had to come down, the Son of the Father, give himself up on the cross for death, and look sad there, that's one reading. But you can read it another way. As the zeal of eternity for incarnation in time, which involves the breaking up of the one into the many and the acceptance of the sufferings of the will as part of. 154. The magic flight. The organic delights, the wisdom heath and rapture, the bliss. Highs in bliss. Saint Augustine says this somewhere, where he says, Jesus went to the cross as the bridegroom to the bride. That's a total transformation of the idea. Another own. The idea of the end of time. The end of time. A historical event. That's nonsense, and what does it matter? The importance of the end of time is a psychological event. Then you have it or enter it and experience it that way. When you have seen the radiance of eternity through all the forms of time, and it's a function of art to make that visible to you. The end you have really ended life in the world as it is live be those who think only in the historic terms. This is the function. Vierge Ouvrante, France, 15th century. 155. The Hero's Journey. Entrance to Jerusalem. Giotto du Bondone, ca. 1305. Of mythology. That's a mythological reading of what was otherwise a theological statement. TARNAS. So in some ways the Christian institutional religion assert on the side of historical concretism? Campbell. Radically TARNAS. And it's just built into the side of the religion. Campbell. Well, right now, in competition with all the gurus and Rinpoche Sandrishis who are coming over here, the Christians are beginning to think, yeah, perhaps not sociology and just helping the poor, but find the divine within yourself. And living not you but Christ in you. We need the Orient to teach us about the aspect of personal experience in religion. The Christ idea and the Buddha idea are perfectly equivalent mythological symbols. Two ways of saying the same thing. 156. The magic flight. Chakra reappearing from the golden coffin. The Christ idea and the Buddha idea are perfectly equivalent mythological symbols. Two ways of saying the same thing. That a transcendent energy consciousness informs the whole world and informs you. That a transcendent energy consciousness informs the whole world and informs you. To become aware of that, and to live out of that center instead of out of this mind center, is the salvation of your life. That means putting yourself in accord with nature. That means also that you must understand nature to be harmonious. Whereas in our biblical tradition with the fall, a good God created a good world, the diabolical intruder broke it up so that nature is corrupt. The end you have to distinguish this and distinguish that. You can't yield to nature that way and say this is where I'm going to have you to yield. All of the ear codes of right and wrong, synonymous, that whole. I don't know what is behind the institutional insistence upon that. I think of it very of Tina's. Well, remember the old 157. The hero's journey. Lister and Edward would say, avenge your best friend Wendell. But you have bad breath. And the way to rescue yourself is to buy Listerine. What the church tells you even your best friend Wendell. But you Arkinson. And we've got the medicine for you right here. And when you've got an invisible cure for an invisible disease, you've got something you can sell. Foe. Brown. Why have we in the West lost this sense of what you are calling accord with nature? Campbell. We're getting back to a kind of Lamarckian view, Lamarck was earlier than Darwin, and of Goethe. Goethe had a theory of evolution. And Schopenhauer has a wonderful paper called The Will in Nature, where he speaks about these things. Favorite. So you think at the protoplasmic level there is some intention? Campbell. There has to be. I saw a film of my friend Stanley Kellerman, made at the University of Pennsylvania, I think, of just raw protoplasm under a microscope. And you see the sacs aciflow, and then there is a flow this way, and pretty so on the flow. Is building a little channel for itself, it's building a house for itself. When I drove down here to Esalen from San Francisco after that film, all he could see as I drove was protoplasm. Protoplasm in the form of cow seeding, protoplasm in the form of grass, and protoplasm overhead. It was a kind of satori, a kind of revelation, the whole world is intentional protoplasm, with consciousness and energy. From then I come to the feeling of energy and consciousness being two aspects of the same thing. Favorite. The physicists are saying that nowadays. Campbell. I know they are. I got a wonderful letter from a biologist from Harvard, a professor emeritus, Arnold Oldman. Hessen me paper that the had read at one of the international. 158. The Magic Flight. Congresses, on said, it shocks my scientific consciousness but I have to conclude that there is an intention in nature. Brown. But doesn't that run against this grain? He just coma spiritually to that sense because the physical theories didn't allow that kind of thinking. Campbell. One of the great things about a good scientist is, whether I runs against this grain or not, he speaks out what finds his evidence. That's the thing that most religious people don't do. They stick with their religious thoughts and no amount of evidence will dislodge them. But the scientific attitude is, we haven't found truth. We have found a working hypothesis that explains a new fact. We may have to change the whole thing. It's in. People don't understand this about science. Now I'm interested in the biological thing because I think of mythology as a function of biology. Let's say that every organ of the body has its energy impulse, an impulse to action, and the experience of the conflicts of these different energies inside is what constitutes the psyche. It's nature ducking, and mythology is the expression in personified images of these energies. Brown. How can we channel these energies into our daily lives? Campbell. That's what we're talking about, the relationship of mythology and mythological studies to contemporary lives. My point is that's it actually seen at work in inspiring art careers. Mythology puts you down in that level out of which the imagination functions, and it comes out of the imagination. Ameth. A logical image that has to be explained to the brain is not working. When you move through a culture field that is so alien to your own images and cacophony response, any recognition, then you're out of sync. Thesis. One of the problems with our tradition, with our inherited mythology, let's say the Judeo-Christian tradition that mythologies are in fact the public dreams that move and shape societies, and conversely one's own dreams are the little myths of the private, gods, anti-gods, and guardian powers that are moving and shaping oneself, revela, tions of the actual fears, desires, aims, and values by which one's life is sublime. Nally ordered. Joseph Campbell, The Mythic Image. 159. The hero's journey relates to the Near Eastern, the very first millennium B.C. It has nothing to do with life here. Everything has to be explained. Wash it in the blood of the lamb. So what does that mean if you've never even seen a lamb? Guillemen. In cultural distinctions, I can just envision that when we think of the mythology of Medea and Jason and her brewing this soup to rejuvenate the old man, and her searching for the Nepenthenowich soup. Eventually, when I isolated the first of the endorphins, you may say that this was the ultimate crystallization of second idea. Campbell. Which is brew. Guillemen. Yes. Eventhaw. I honestly cannot say that. It was the story of Medea and Jason that led me to look for the endorphin in the brain. Canard. When you were researching, did you think these mythological thoughts? Guillemen. When you were involved in isolating, characterizing one of these molecules from the brain, you don't have much time to think of Medea and Jason. Campbell. I should think not. Canard. My traditionized Judeo-Christianity so far. From the Near East, your tradition, Jamaica, is much closer to you. What difference does that make? Highwater. It makes a great deal of difference. When Joseph Campbell was talking about the washing of the blood of the lamb, I was thinking of the funny fact that to the Inuit, the Eskimo people, it's inconceivable that this terrible place that bad people apparently go from a culture I shot, laughter. Their afterworld is generally very cold and dismal. Now, is that just a matter of setting the thermostat differently? I don't think so. I think it has a basic kind of human poetry. Andy don't think poetry is limited to artists. Aussie understand it Einstein was not a great scientist, he was a great poet. Hugh escapable. The scientists or technologists latter proved wah the intuited. But largely what he did was not anything remotely like 19th century science. And that is why I think he's a master of 20th century science. Canard. Aren't scientists always telling our Rododo? Aren't scientists always accused of having a mythology? Campbell. Well, these are two totally different perspectives. THEPROBLEMOFSCIENCEISTOGIVEYOUANIMAGEOFTHEUNI 160. The masks of God. Every mythic image points past itself. Every deity opens to mystery. Osef Campbell. The Bodhisattva, Kuan Yin, Chinese sculpture, 11th to early 12th century. The Light of the World, Holman Hunt, 1853. Cretan snake goddess, discovered near the Palace of Gnosis, 1600 to 1500 B.C. Merlin slaying the Great Bull. Roman relief, 3rd century A.D. Quetzalcoatl sun mask, featuring the Hedot. Ania Gleed its center, from the northwest. Coast Indians. The Zapotec Mesa god represented on a clay urn. Monte Alban, Oaxaca, Mexico, 5th to 8th century. Amaterasu, the Japanese goddess of the sun. Colored wood cut by Utagawa Kunisada, Japan, 1857. Cernunnos, Celtic stag antlered god, detail from the Gundestrup cauldron. 2nd century B.C., discovered in Denmark. The Magic Flight. Robert Bly, Stanislav Grof and Roger Guillemot discuss the relevance of the work of their friend Joseph Campbell in The Gardens of Esalen Institute, 1982. C1. Angelus Arian, Jamaica Highwater, and Betty Andreessen relax on